Okay, and we can get started. So, I'm interviewing you for one of my classes. I'm in Intro to Entrepreneurship. And
Mhm.
basically, throughout the semester, we started off like finding problems with in the world. And now we're sort of transitioning to finding solutions to those problems. So, a problem that I found was that there's a lack of access to music education and like music resources in the world. And it began like with COVID and like just teaching in general. And then I kind of narrowed it down to music. And so now me and my team are like transitioning to finding solutions to those problems. So when I came across the Turnaround Arts program, I thought it would be awesome to hear more about it and just to learn how you guys maneuvered through like creating it and everything. So to begin, could you just explain to me like what the program is, and how it was created, and also how you became a part of it?
Sure. So Turn On Arts started in 2011, and it started as an initiative with the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities, PCAH, and that was during the Obama administration.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the way it began, the idea was that there would be different types of turnaround programs. So there would be turnaround arts, there would be turnaround science, there would be turnaround math. So it wasn't only originating out of this idea of arts education, it was really originating out of this idea of school reform and turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important to note because um, that's it's a pretty problematic framework when we talk about reforming and which schools need reform,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of often ignores some ongoing sort of systemic issues in our country around education, around how schools are funded and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and it was an initiative that involved some other organizations like Americans for the Arts. Um, and it originally was sort of an independent body, but housed at the White House. And it became clear that it wasn't going to be able to stay at the White House.
Mm-hmm.
So there were negotiations toward the end of Obama's second term to move it to the Kennedy Center. So now, instead of being its sort of own organization, it's a program of a larger organization. So
Mm-hmm.
that happened in 2016. And I was essentially recruited by the founding director, Kathy Fletcher. So um, she had come to learn about my work as a teaching artist in Washington, D.C.,
Mm-hmm.
and encouraged me to apply for the position. So I became the national director in March. I'm losing my 2019. Yeah, I'm losing my sense of time. So, right, because now we're in, yeah. So it's been about a year and a half now that I've been in the position of national director of Turnaround Arts. The model for Turnaround Arts is it's very unusual and it's very complex in some ways. Typically, sort of arts-based education nonprofits, typically they would start with one school, for instance, in one city. Then they might expand to 3 or 4 schools in that city. Then they might expand to other states. But because Turnaround Arts was a national initiative, it actually started in 8 schools across the country.
Oh, okay.
And then it expanded to 32 schools. And then it expanded to 56 schools. And then it went up to about 70 schools. And now we're actually shrinking a bit right now as some of the schools have aged out of the program. And initially, it was just meant to be a 3-year incubator.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those elements are kind of important to notice. Um, because of the way it grew so exponentially, it has kind of shifted the way the program has grown. So it's not that the program went to 70 schools and there were suddenly 15 staffers. It's still been the same 5 to 7 people
Right.
doing the work. So there's that challenge. But the structure of Turnaround Arts is that there are local program directors.
Okay.
So each local program, whether that's, and each local program has its own unique business model.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, Turnaround Arts California is its own 501c3. It does receive, money and resources from national, as all the local programs do, but because it's its own 501c3, it also fundraises independently. Mm-hmm. And that's the largest local program. There are 24 schools in California right now that are Turnaround Arts schools, and there'll be 3 or 4 more schools added next year. But then you have a local program like Turnaround Arts Des Moines, which is very rooted in Des Moines school district. So all of the local program staff that run Turnaround Arts, they are hired by the Des Moines Public School District. Then we have a program where the schools just aged out, Turnaround Arts Hawaii. That was run by a cultural organization, the Hawaii Arts Alliance. So they paid for those staffers who then ran the local program, who then worked with the local schools. So that's another thing that sort of makes Turnaround Arts very unique and unusual, is that there's this shared leadership model, but also this idea that communities tailor it work, which brings some gifts and also some challenges. So if the district cuts its budget, which has happened before, if they cut staff and they cut all of the Turnaround Arts staff, then there's no more Turnaround Arts in that city. So this is just one of the sort of many challenges as the program continues to grow. And I think the other thing is that we're really interested in moving away from a 3-year model, because 3 years is not enough. Right. It really takes, in order to really see impact in a school that's sustainable, you really are looking at more like, 5 or 6 to 10 years is a good arc. So for instance, something that we're really pleased with, one of our schools in Minnesota that's been with the program for 6 years recently was declared a national blue ribbon school. So that means they went from being sort of one of having, some of the lowest test scores in the country to really closing a lot of the opportunity gaps there. Wow. The other thing that we're sort of focused on now is moving away from a reformer or white savior model of education, and really thinking about equity, thinking about culturally responsive teaching and learning, social emotional learning. And a personal pet peeve of mine is that in this country, for public schools in particular, the arts are usually having to justify themselves based on things like math scores, reading scores, school attendance, as opposed to just saying all children deserve the arts. And why don't we make that part of the curriculum? There's this idea of like, well, first you got to get test scores up, or, if your math scores aren't going up, then we shouldn't have arts in that school, which, if you go to a public school or even, a private school or a public school in a really wealthy area, that's not the case. It's not like choose math or music. Right. So that's, I think, also a big part of our mission, is to sort of uncouple those things. I'll give you one last important example, and then I'm sure you have some questions for me. So the other issue, because you talked about like the lack of arts education, even outside of COVID, like in Washington, D.C., most elementary school children receive 16 minutes of arts instruction per week. Wow. And so one of the things Turnaround Arts does when it makes a contract with the district and with local arts organizations is to say, you need to commit to providing 1 hour of arts per week, which when I first took the job, I thought, that's so little, 1 hour a week. But if you think that students are getting 16 minutes a week, 12 minutes a week, which essentially means 1 session per month, that's how dire the lack of arts is in America.
That is so crazy for me, especially because I grew up like my graduating class was 58 people, and I grew up in a really small town, and I always, like, from when I was in elementary school, I've always participated in music. Like, I had general music, and then once I was old enough to be in band, I played in band until I was a senior, and like my brothers did. So it's so different for me to think about like all these places that it's never been given to them, and how crazy that is, because it's like
Yeah.
I've always grown up with that, and I've never had to deal with not having like I'm very fortunate for that. So it's kind of eye-opening to see all these places that don't have those luxuries, I guess.
Yeah.
But that was great. It's crazy to think how like impactful you guys are on the rest of the nation, because like I said, I come from a small town, so thinking about like Hawaii and California being impacted is crazy. So it kind of goes into my next question. Who would you say is like the target for these programs? Like, what type of schools do you look for when you're looking to like reach your programs to them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. When the program began, so every presidential administration sort of makes up its educational, sort of platform. So, in the past it was No Child Left Behind, and then that everything sort of trickled down from No Child Left Behind. So when Turnaround Arts started, there was a designation called Focus and Priority, and the way schools got that designation, their test scores had to be in the lowest 10% in the nation. It also looked at things like income levels, which was often judged by what percentage of students are on free and reduced lunch. So some of our schools, 90% of students receive free or reduced lunch, which is to say that 90% of the families, their families are at or below the poverty line. Now, focus and priority doesn't exist. So we're actually having a debate with ourselves about how we define what can qualify as a turnaround arts school. But essentially, you can say that it has to do with schools where there's tremendous economic need, and usually schools where there's been historic disinvestment. And that's important to frame it. Before it was, people would say, oh, it's failing schools. But again, we have to go back and understand what are the conditions that would lead someone to define a school as failing. Are 8-year-olds just failing, or are they not actually being provided with the resources that they need?
Exactly. Yeah.
So we want to change the mindset so that it's not about blaming, like, well, you poor people, you Black and brown people, you just can't get it together, and really say, well, there's no banks in these neighborhoods. There's no groceries. There's very few jobs. The jobs that are here are paying minimum wage, which is not enough for a family to actually have adequate housing and childcare. So a lot of times, let's say it's a single mother, she has to choose, if she's working, can she afford the childcare to pay for her children while she's at work?
Right.
Because we don't have free childcare in America. So all of those factors play a role. And it's just, we really want to make sure that we're not blaming the victim in this case, blaming people who happen to be born into economic distress and challenging situations.
Exactly.
So all of that is to say, though, there are areas where there's less resources.
Right. And that kind of leads into the next question I was going to ask, which is, do you think that there is a lack of accessibility to music education in our country, and that like this is a problem, like a real life problem?
Absolutely. There's a lack of music education, and it's across the nation. But it's very, very class-based. I have worked as a teaching artist for many years, largely in Washington, D.C. And when I go to Sidwell Friends, which is a private Quaker school where like many presidents have sent their children, they've got plenty of arts and arts resources, and a full theater and drama club and dance, and the dance teams perform every year their concert, and there's music, and there's after school options, all of those things. And then you drive 20 minutes away and none of those things exist in the school, or there's not teaching staff, So I've talked to friends in neighborhoods that would be considered kind of middle class, and there's like a visiting art teacher who comes once or twice a month and teaches for a day in that school. And that's
it.
what. Another thing that one of our principals at a turnaround art school in DC was saying, principals have to choose between language arts, PE, and or I'll say foreign language, physical education, and the arts. They can't have all three in their schools unless they can find additional budgetary means to provide all three. So those are terrible choices.
Right.
And that's
like, that kind of ties in because it's funny because I'm actually like, I want to be a physical therapist when I get older, and I'm minoring in business administration. So the business world is kind of like foreign to me, I guess. But like you were saying, like PE along with like music education, like even deciding between those, I feel like we should never have to make the choice, because I've seen both sides now, like taking physical education courses and like sports courses. Like I've seen the importance of those along with what I'm learning now about music. And so it's like, it's unfortunate that schools are having to decide between things like that because there's a lack of resources.
Yeah.
Okay, so on your website, I found an article that kind of highlighted some of these things, but have you personally witnessed the impact that music education can have on like childhood development, both like cognitively or emotionally?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give an example of something that I experienced. So the director of implementation at Turnaround Arts, his name is Winston Cox. And before he joined the national team, he was a principal of a Turnaround Arts school in Washington, D.C. called Noyes Elementary. And last year we went to the spring musical. So one of the things that Turnaround Arts provides to many of its schools are musical theater kits. So Musical Theater International provides us with free kits for all of our schools. Many of the schools that are in Turnaround Arts never had a musical before, joining the program. And that's a big deal as well. That's one of those galvanizing experiences, the same way you had such a positive experience in band. A school musical allows lots of children the opportunity to sing, to dance, to collaborate together, to have the experience of rehearsing and growing and learning. So we went to Noyes to see their musical, which was Willy Wonka. And the lead of the musical was a young boy named Jason. And Winston had remembered when he was a principal, Jason was a new student. I don't remember which country his parents are from, but he came in incredibly shy. He cried a lot at the beginning of school. And to see 3 years later that he's not just in the musical, he's the lead role. Yeah. And he was fantastic. And to see that kind of shift and opening, that confidence, the skills, being able to sing, to dance, to public, speak in public, all of that is just tremendous. That's just one example I can give of how the arts can transform an individual student's life.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. A reason I like really got into this problem was because my brother, he was one of the first people I had interviewed, and he is a music teacher. He's a general music teacher in Virginia, actually. And so I had interviewed him like when I was trying to just find general problems, and then this came up. But when he started teaching, I think he's in his third year of teaching, but when he started teaching, the school he went to had absolutely no music education for their elementary school. And when he went there, it was like he grew up the same as me, having it all his life. And so he was so surprised, and the school and the community ended up like loving him as a teacher because he was bringing so much joy to the kids and everything. And he had musicals for the kids in the spring and everything. And that was like so impactful and stuff. And even witnessing that and the impact that like just new music and like beginning to learn it can have on like even the community was crazy. And also it kind of ties into like with previous interviews that I've had, a lot of people have stated how music provides so many future opportunities that it otherwise wouldn't provide. For example, scholarships and other things that might promote kids to like go to college and extend their education. And for my brother, that was really impactful because he was in our high school. I kind of like to brag about him, but he was a phenomenal singer, and he went to like all state, all regionals, and then he went to all nationals, which was at the Kennedy Center in 2014, I want to say. But so like those opportunities, now that I think about it, it's like he wouldn't have had those if he wasn't given the guidance that like we were given. So my next question is, okay, so like I had said, our team is now trying to focus on solutions to the lack of music education and music resources. And these are by no means like businesses, but we just had these ideas that we were coming up with, and I'd like to just hear your opinions on them. So the first one that we came up with was after school programs in which students would have guidance and be taught how to play like different musical instruments, read music, and they'd have like mentors to like guide them, either like volunteers or other music educators. The second idea we came up with would be available for, I want to say like all individuals, not just people in like children in schools, but it would be like monthly subscriptions in which people could choose an instrument and receive access to the instrument and also video lessons. And in that way, they could possibly like play out an instrument for a month. And if they wanted to continue it, they could continue playing that same one or maybe transition to a different instrument. And then the third idea that we came up with was a method in which people in like a neighborhood could rent out their unused instruments to others within their neighborhood to give people access to instruments that they might not have already. So I was just wondering if you have any critiques or opinions on those.
Yeah. So, music after school programs clearly exist, and most cities have some sort of organization that does that. It's often tied with, a local symphony or orchestra, and then they provide arts education, supplementary arts education to students. And so that model's pretty established. I think of the three ideas, the monthly subscription was the most compelling to me, and I've heard of a similar thing. Boston Arts Academy, I think, did something similar, and because they have, I don't know if it's still through EL Learning, but their students have to do something project based. So they actually did something very similar to that, and it went very successfully, is my understanding. But the idea of the monthly subscription and the online classes, particularly during the pandemic, that's something that could happen now. So one of the challenges we're finding right now is even our turnaround art schools that have equipment, you can't get the band together, you can't play wind instruments, and you can't all be congregated together. So the idea that maybe you could take a guitar or a violin or a ukulele home and practice it is a good idea. We are in the process right now of forming a partnership with Fender Play Foundation. So, Fender guitars. They recently started a foundation based around this app they have called Fender Play. And it does something very similar. You have a subscription and you get lessons that you can sort of self-guide. And also, depending on where you are, if you're participating in their pilot program, they give you a guitar or a ukulele. I like the idea, though, that someone could rotate instruments. So they could try violin, they could try drum, they could try guitar. And sort of, so it's a kind of a cross between your last idea, I think would be a little bit difficult logistically, because you could put up flyers, but depending on the neighborhood, how many instruments are there that are unused?
Right.
You're going to have greater need, I think, than resources, if that's where you're looking.
And I had someone else that I had talked to that I brought these up mentioned something about possibly combining like our third idea with the after school programs just so that we would have like the availability of the instruments. So like find people who are willing to donate their instruments to after school programs so that they would have access, which I thought was a really good idea as well.
Mhm. The other thing I've heard of is it's kind of like, I don't think it could be done during COVID, but it's kind of like a flea market, but instead of selling something, um, and again, I think this example came from Boston Arts Academy as well. Um, People from the neighborhood, like they put up signs, and people from the neighborhood who know how to play an instrument offer to come to this like flea market and teach someone for 30 minutes or an hour how to play that instrument. So it's like a barter and exchange, and it gives you that sort of instrument petting zoo effect where students can try different instruments. So they
That's
could do
cool.
like a 15-minute like mini lesson.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've never heard of that, but that's something I should look into. Well, that was awesome. I don't have any more questions for you. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, or anyone else that you think I should contact for my project?
I think, no, I feel good about what we've discussed, and I hope that it's helpful.
Yeah.
If something comes to mind, I have your email so I can reach out to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciated it, and I feel like I gained a lot of insight on this. So thank you.
Good, I'm glad. Yeah, good luck with your paper and with your project.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay.